When most people think of a guy's trip, they think of getting away from their families, partying, and doing questionable things with the bros. This is not that. This isn't about a trip. It's bigger than that. It's a movement. This is a community with one intention in mind: to become better men. I'm your host, Kyle Depius. My guests and I will share the tools and strategies that have allowed us to transform our lives, create freedom, and be the men we want to be. If you're committed to growth for yourself and your family, you're in the right place. This is Guy's Trip.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Guy's Trip, where we are building better men. I've got a guest for you, and you guys, I am so excited about this guy. Let me give you a quick brief bio about him. Stephen Mansfield is a New York Times best-selling author and popular speaker who leads a speaker training firm based in Washington, D.C. He serves part-time as a senior fellow of public leadership at Palm Beach Atlantic University and as an ambassador for the Center for Christian Statesmanship. He lives in both Nashville and Washington, D.C. with his wife, Beverly. So I first came across one of Stephen Mansfield's books a couple years back. I took a group of guys over to Ireland for a golf trip. And as I like to do when I travel to different countries, I just try and find a book, maybe learn a little more about the country. And this book jumped out at me that Stephen Mansfield wrote. It was called In Search of God and Guinness. It's about the Guinness family. As if you don't know, Guinness is made and is from Ireland. So I thought that would be a really cool book to read. And you guys, I really enjoy Stephen's style of writing. He is a history guy. He's a researcher. But you think of those two things, like, oh, it's going to be a dry topic. He weaves in stories. He's a great storyteller. He brings in humor. And so he captivated me with that first book. Find it, read it, especially if you've got any sort of interest in Ireland or Guinness or both. And then the other book that I picked up was Mansfield's Book of Manly Men. And now Stephen kind of finds himself in this stage of speaking a lot about manhood and masculinity. And that's obviously the tie that I wanted to bring in to you, the listener. So I think you're going to get a lot from this topic. Stephen is a wealth of knowledge. He is kind of that sage, older man. He's older than me, so I'll say older. He's not old by any stretch of the means. But he's got a lot of life wisdom, and that's what I wanted to talk to him about. Without any further delay, here's my conversation with Stephen Mansfield. Hey, Stephen, welcome to the podcast. I'm humbled by this. I'm really excited to have this conversation. Thank you for taking time to be here with me today.
Buddy, it's my privilege, and I'm very proud of what you do, Kyle. So
thank you.
Just keep doing it. It's a privilege to be part of your program.
Thank you. Well, I had said before we hit record, I came across your work as an author. You've written several books. I think you're up to the 24, maybe approaching 36 pretty soon. But the book that stood out to me was The Search for God and Guinness. I had told you earlier I was planning a trip to Ireland with some guys. We were all turning 40. We're going to go there to golf, and I wanted to get into some history. And your style of writing, I want to give you a compliment here. It blends history with research, with storytelling, and then nuggets of wisdom for personal growth. And that's what kind of turned me on to your work. So I'd like to maybe start there, because where did that come from? You as a writer, how did you develop this unique ability to blend all those things together and captivate a reader like you caught me?
Well, you're very kind. I got to tell you that my writing style quite literally comes from years of boredom in school. And then later in life, and I'm not trying to pick on my teachers, later in life, I found such excitement in what they were trying to teach me that I started thinking, well, how can I approach this material in a way that's exciting? For example, you've read The Search for God and Guinness. So I described the fact that we often jam the story of the pilgrims down the throats of the young. I now, as
Yeah.
an older guy, love that story. Have written about it, have written books about it, have helped write plays about it. Why couldn't we make it exciting? Come on. Some people went across the ocean for 66 days. They're escaping to, preserve their faith. They meet Native Americans. By the way, I am a Native American, so I'm not picking on anybody. The first thing the Native American says is, "Do you have some beer?" Obviously they've been with English people before. I mean, why can't we make that exciting? Why can't we make that interesting? The first thing they build is a brewery. Why? Because they didn't trust the water in that generation. And so it's about beer, it's about Native Americans, it's about excitement. Well, I slept through all that in the fifth or sixth grade whenever they taught me that. So what I decided to do was I realized after a while I had a decent speaking ability. That's what came first. And then I began to realize that there were some writers I really admired who really reached me. They wrote history in a different way. And so I was working on my graduate degrees at that time, and I thought, I'm not going to be the traditional academic historian. I'm going to try to figure out a way to use story to capture people. We now know from brain science experts that story is the way people store information the best, retain it the best, and drain the meaning out of it the best. So, long answer to a short question. Bottom line was I just decided that I was going to try to redeem some of the great stories of history. And I was also not just going to preach at people. If I want you to be a better man, I'm going to write a book about the stories of great men and let you read it and get inspired on your own. I don't have to say you ought to, you should, you're bad, you should, don't touch that, that kind of thing. I'm gonna make it exciting. So that's why I've taken the approach I have, and by God's grace, it's been successful. I'm really
Yeah.
grateful.
Yeah. Well, that's a great segue because the next book that I picked up of yours, which I have right here, and that is Mansfield's Book of Manly Men. And to your point you just made, you don't just say, here's all the virtues of manhood or here's the character qualities. You look back into history and you found some characters that everyone knows and remembers or knows a little bit about, but you brought storytelling behind it. But I'd like to know, before we kind of get into some of this book and some more of those things in there, what made you decide, because the last several books, at least that I've seen of yours, it's about manhood. So could you talk about kind of this, why is this important to you? And then we're going to get into what is the definition of it. But first, why kind of the movement towards why are we writing these books about manhood? Because you've got this one, you've got a book about building your band of brothers, and then another one, I think it's Men of Fire. So what was kind of the things, the precipice leading up to starting to talk about manhood?
Well, a combination of things. I had, as we've said, some success as an author, and so publishers were saying, "What now? Let's turn it around. Let's not write in terms of an election or a need. What do you want to say, Mansfield? What would you like your legacy to be?" I was in a real fortunate position to have some publishers ask me that. Well, not only in the books that I've written, but in my own life, I was paying attention to the downward spiral of men in our generation. It wasn't hard to see. You can watch a television commercial and see that the fool in that television commercial is the middle-aged, dad, while my wife's rolling his eyes at him and the kids are snickering and all that. You can see the statistics, etc. So I decided that I would use part of my platform for the rest of my life to impact men. And one of the reasons, really, it was very warm to me because of the books I'd written. I spoke on a lot of university campuses. And while I enjoyed the faculty, I got a doctorate, and I have a role at a university. I'm not anti-intellectual. But often what I would most enjoy late at night was not so much being with the faculty, who had frankly gone to bed anyway, but going to the campus watering hole with the students.
Yeah.
And now I'm sitting there, males and females, but the men realize they've got a male they can relate to. I'm not bragging. I'm just saying, some of these guys, unfathered, nobody they can talk to, so late at night, they start asking me man questions. And you just realize how unfathered this generation is and the criticisms. Sometimes I was speaking at a university where actually their courses would criticize what I would call noble manhood, good manhood. It's not all toxic. And so all of that conspired together to make me want to address it with an organization. I have a group called Great Man Global, written 3 books for men, do a lot of speaking for men, and trying, because I also have a life in DC that's involved in advising politicians and trying to shape events there. I'm trying to get some things going through the government to fund studies and services and so on that try to rescue boys from their downward spiral right now. So that's where all of that came from. Plus, by the way, I mean this in a completely hetero way. I just love men. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Crazy about my wife, work with a lot of women, but put me around a fire circle with a bunch of guys and a stogie, and that's where I start coming together. So it's a lot of fun.
It's it's interesting your story, and I heard you talk about destiny before and a little bit of legacy because I'm similar in the sense that I never set out to be in this space of creating this brand called Guys Trip. I never intended to work with men and help men get closer to and reach their full potential. But that's the position I found myself in by God's grace and God's work and His sovereignty. And to I think what you had said, like, I don't think you ever started out like, hey, this is what I want to do. This is my intention. It just kind of came up by what we can see connecting the dots looking backwards now. But for the guy out there who's listening and say he's 40-ish, he's been working 10, 20 years in maybe it's corporate America. He's experiencing some success. Things are going well, but there's a disconnect. And that disconnect is he doesn't feel in alignment with his work and maybe some of the things that he's passionate about. You and I are very passionate about what we're doing. It took us some time to get there. How would you encourage that person who's like, Stephen, I'm not doing work that is really lighting me up. I don't feel like this is what my purpose is, my calling, but I don't know what that is. What would you say to encourage that man?
Well, it's a great situation to be in because what you need to realize if you're not fully suited, if all pistons aren't firing in the role that you're in, and you know that this isn't ultimately what you'll do, it's actually an exciting time. A change is going to come, right?
Hmm.
A change is going to come. So I'm sorry I can't do anything but speak as a Christian. Ask God to superintend, to be sovereign in your life. If you don't know what
Hmm.
those words mean, to run your life basically.
Yep.
But also throw yourself into the task ahead. I got where I am. I don't mean that bragging, but working with men, um, without ever knowing that I would. Not long before, I started working with men. In other words, when I had my first New York Times bestseller, my second, my third, if somebody said, "Will you ever write a book for men?" I probably would have said no. I wasn't there yet. So a lot of the art of destiny is throw yourself fully into the next thing God gives you or the next thing the world hands you. As it says in Scripture, whatever your hand finds to do, do it with all your heart. And then God picks you up from there and takes you on to the next thing. So for the guy who's, working a corporate job but knows this isn't the ultimate, okay, even that knowing means God's at work in your life, right? It's not just you recognizing that this isn't the fit. It's also God saying, there's more, whispering in your ear, there's more.
Hmm.
But you don't just up and quit and impoverish your family and tarnish your reputation and all that.
Yep.
Do it with all your heart, do it well, serve your bosses well, do your job with excellence, acquire more skills, earn that master's along the way if you can, get the training. But always be trusting God that the new thing's going to come along and there'll be time for a change. I'm making some major changes in my life this year, not because it's bad, but I'm reconfiguring my priorities in terms of the work that I do. More politics, and I'm not running for office, but advising people and orchestrating things and speaking on the Hill and so on. A little less of some other things because I had a sense that of exactly what your fictional person is feeling. That there's not the configuration's not quite right.
Yep.
But I finished the season that I was in, so to speak. I did good work by God's grace. I didn't get frustrated and mad and start mistreating people. I asked God to show me when the steps were right, and the time came. And this year, I'm reconfiguring almost the priorities of my entire life, and I'll be more effective and happier by the end of the year. So that's what you have to do. Trust God. Throw yourself into the work you've got. I know that's weird because you think, hey, if I'm going to make a change one day, I should pull back from what I'm doing. No, immerse yourself in what you're doing. Do it well, and then could be that this is a season God's orchestrated for you. Before He moves you on to a new thing, He wants you to learn all the lessons you're supposed to learn now. So a
Yeah.
lot of people are in that role, but if they'll approach it that way, I've seen time and again magnificent things happen.
There was a guy who I sat serendipitously on a flight to Singapore once, and he told me when I was in this same spot, he said, "You may not love what you do, but you should love the way you do what you do." And that's always stuck with me. And I think that's to the point that you had just said. Before we get any further, though, I do want to ask, in the most succinct way, the clear way, how would you define manhood? Let's kind of get into this topic. Let's define it and then let's unpack it.
Well, for me, manhood is fulfilling God's design for men, fulfilling the lore of manhood, the heritage of manhood, blending what comes from your past into a manly code that I think largely comes from Scripture. I think men are meant to make women safe and children strong and communities thriving and lead so that everybody is better for their presence. And I think men also have to bond together to be the best they can be. They need each other to sharpen each other. So if I have to put it in succinct language, which, I'm a writer, I'm not really going to be that succinct, buddy. But I would have to say fulfilling the design. Those are the words that live in my brain, that God has a design for manhood in general, for Stephen Mansfield as a man, for my unique context, in my wife, among my children, my grandchildren, with my men, with the people I have influence over. So fulfill the divine plan, fulfill the design, to use scripture language, fulfill the pattern revealed from heaven. There's a pattern for men. And when they walk in it, they're powerful and strong and transforming. And so those are the words that play over and over again in my mind. Walk in the way chosen for you, so to speak.
There's a great proverb that we use in Guy's Trip, and it says, "Be diligent to know the state of your flocks and tend to your herds." I think the original, the context and the character there is speaking to someone who's shepherding people, probably in the church. But I think we could take that and elaborate and say, men, and you talk about this in the book of Manly Men, you have a field that's assigned to you.
Yes.
And I love some of your thoughts on this in modern culture and society. And I like you responded to someone asking you this question once, saying, is society to blame for the current state of manhood? And you responded directly back with, no, we are to blame with that. And society is just kind of calling us out. And I love that, by the way. But what do you see maybe as some of the things that, again, I'm a Gen Xer, I'm on the borderline of the millennial generation, but guys like me, this generation, what do you see from an observational standpoint, some of the things that we are really struggling with as men?
Well, most of the men of your age that I hang with struggle from deep insecurity. And I had something of the same thing growing up. My father was a man who loved me and was not abusive, but he was harsh. He was a military man. And so he would come home and sometimes deal with his oldest son, who is big, strong, oldest son, who was a little, he wasn't afraid of physically, but he was afraid, oh my gosh, this kid, if he goes amok, he's going to tear up the world. And so he'd come home and deal with me like he would a private or a sergeant. Deep insecurity. And that comes from perhaps not being fathered well. I'm not assuming that of you, of course, Kyle. That comes from the challenges to manhood in the universities and modern philosophy in our culture. It comes from not having models. It also comes from not having had a band of brothers, which is why I'm so big on that. I've written a book called Building Your Band of Brothers. Yep. Men should walk secure. And for men, often security is certainly not having wounds and things that debilitate you and make you walk with a limp. But it means having the voice of fathers and brothers in your head as to who you are. If you and I hang together, you're going to maybe have a better sense of who you are in the reflection I hold up for you and the things I say to you, not just because I'm a little older than you, but because that's what men do. Yeah. You've said that you've affirmed me in this broadcast. And so I leave this broadcast a better man because you've said, here's who you are and here's the impact you're having and here's what you've said. And I'm like, wow, that's me. Let's go do something. Yeah. So number one would be insecurity. Number one would be insecurity. But the other side of it is that this is different from insecurity, is that men often don't know what, this is not going to be obvious, what manhood is. Yeah. So I'm going to speak down to you for a minute. Your generation tends to overcomplicate things, right? And that's partly a result of the insecurity that bedevils your generation. You don't know what something is. It must be unbelievably complex. Like I look at an airplane and I go, oh my gosh, how complex it is. But I've got 5 airline pilot friends and they're like, this is easy. Come look, come watch, just grab that thing. They talk about it like it's flipping pizzas and they're spinning jets in the air, But why is it complex to me? Because I don't know anything about it. Yep. When you approach something completely as an outsider, it looks immensely complex. So your generation tends to be insecure and think of manhood as something unbelievably complex and, of course, even under suspicion by our culture. And so the good news about your generation is that you are high relational, you gravitate to models, you're easy to coach once you decide to be coached, and
Yep.
progress is rapid. I love working with your age group. I know I'm speaking like I'm not part of it. I'm only slightly older than you, but I love being working with your gang because they catch the vision, baby. They're on fire,
Yeah.
and so they overcome that insecurity. They listen to the lessons, sit with them around the fire, and say, "Look, all of us deal with that. You got to realize you've just let it become a big thing in your head." And they look like, "Oh my gosh, look like you just invented fire, like you just came up with some brilliant thing." And so once I started assuring them that they're walking in the normal path of manhood and dealing with the same things, that Susie in homeroom in the fifth grade, had the same effect on me it's having on you, but you have to learn how to tame it, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So I'm proud of you guys, but you guys got some debilitating things you got to get over.
Yeah. You mentioned in their friendships, and I think this is something that I don't know that it's specifically my generation, but I think many mine and younger are struggling here. As we get older, let me just paint the picture like you have a wife, then you have a family, and then now you're raising a family, and your kids are in all the different sports that we feel compelled that we need to take our kids to. And then all of a sudden, friendships look like default or proximity. Default, you've got high school friends, college friends, they've just been your friends, but you haven't talked to them forever. Proximity, I view as someone that you just see often, whether it's a coworker or they're a dad of one of your kids, friends that you're going to a soccer game to watch. But friendship, I think, is something that my generation is really struggling. You wrote a book on this. I love because I've got guys who join me in Guys Trip and they say, it's just time I've realized I need to prioritize male friendships. And that's kind of what Guys Trip has turned into. But from your standpoint, someone who's my age, who just, again, is struggling with lack of deep and meaningful friendships because he's building a business or he's building his career along with his wife and his kids, how can he focus on building some deep and meaningful relationships?
Well, I want to move away from the word friendship just to make a point. Obviously, I
Sure.
believe in it. But what you want to do, most of the males of our generation have fallen into the typical male trap. High school, maybe college, maybe early career, male friendships are easy, right? We
Hmm.
went to school, we went to homeroom, we joined the football team. Bam, we had 19 friends. We had more friends than we wanted.
Yep.
But then, like you say, get married, suddenly have responsibilities, got kids. And what happens is that we find that the people we mainly have and we call friends are rust friends. Psychologists call them rust friends. This means the guy who was in your wedding you haven't talked to in a half a decade. This means the guy who you hung out with in college but you haven't seen him.
Mm.
So what I believe we have to do, I believe our modern lives don't automatically produce relationships the way that they did in earlier generations.
Yeah.
I won't take a lot of time to go into this, although I'm a historian and I could bore the pants off you for hours. The fact is that, back on the American frontier, my gosh, you lived in a village, you relied on each other for survival, you had multi-generational homes,
Yep.
and I mean, multiple generations in a home. Um, and male friendships were just handed to you, your brother, the guy down. I mean, it was just required. But now I believe we've got to be intentional about those relationships. And I believe that what every man's got to do is build a band of brothers. It's
Hmm.
different from friendships.
Yeah.
A friendship can be a guy I have a steak with once in a while. A friendship can be the guy I enjoy at work. I have lots of friends, but my friends, and by that I mean happy, friendly relationships, right? Which can occasionally do something together. But that's not what's necessarily going to help you be a better man. In fact, we all know that we can hang with friends and then go home and be lonely and unchallenged.
Yep.
Uh, I believe you got to build a band of brothers. And what a band of brothers is, it's a slightly different thing. This is a group, and I talk about how to do this in my book, Building Your Band of Brothers, that have come to a point where they have a free fire zone with each other. Now, if you served in the military, free fire zone has to do with the battlefield condition. How freely can you fire your weapon at the enemy? That's obviously not what I'm talking about. Kyle, if you and I are in the same town and I'm trying to make you one of my band of brothers, I'm going to come to the point where I'm going to say, I want to have a free fire zone with you. Anything you need to say to make me better, I challenge you to say it.
Mm.
We're going to have fun. Animals are going to give their lives on the back patio. We're gonna make each other better. We're going to work out, but we're going to have a band of brothers. I'm going to keep my eyes on you. I'm going to be close to you. I'm going to watch what you do. We're going to have rowdiness and all kinds of fun, but I'm also going to be in your life to make you a better man. I challenge you to say the same thing. No hand wringing, no wondering who's going to talk to Stephen. One of our problems is, especially in our church worlds, I know we're not speaking exclusively to guys from church world, but even in our church worlds, we have accountability groups. Well, accountability group assumes that I'm going to think about what's wrong with me, wait 3 weeks, go to that breakfast across town, and over biscuits and gravy, tell you what I think is wrong with me, so that you can give me some advice in the 42 minutes that we have before we all have to go to work. Well, you're making a lot of assumptions. You're assuming I'm going to be honest. You're assuming I'm going to figure out what's wrong with me. You're assuming I'm going to show up at that breakfast. You're assuming I'm going to tell you the truth.
Yeah.
No. I need guys walking closely enough with me to have their eyes on me and see what's going on with me, right? Kyle, if we're walking together, I don't want you to only know my life by me narrating it. I mean, I don't have a unique problem with lying, but we'll all fudge. I want you to see that I've gained weight. I want you to notice that I'm checking out the backside of the waitress at the restaurant where we are when I've got an amazing wife at home. I want you to hear the times I extra drop the F-bomb. I don't, but I'm just saying, suppose I do. I want you to know when one glass of wine an evening becomes a bottle and a half. I want you to know when I can't talk about my father without just agonizing bitterness pouring out of me. All of these things are things that kill manhood. And I want you to be coaching me, and I'm coaching you, and we're making each other better. And so I would say to the young men who are listening to this, relationships are harder these days. It's a result of all kinds of things that we all know sociologically. And what you got to do is not just focus on having friends. That just means a great relationship with another male. That's not hard. But how deep does it go? What you got to do is move it from a friendship to band of brothers, which means you kick my backside, I'll kick your backside. We'll watch each other. Every man's got the way I like to say it, I'm going to man the ramparts of your life. You got to struggle. I'm not talking about lust now. I mean, I know there's a book by that title, but whatever's going on with Kyle battles depression. Kyle has a problem with lust. Kyle's good as a husband, not that great as a father. Whatever it is, I'm just making all that up. I'm going to be there for you. And by the way, we're going to have 3 of our other guys who've got gifts we don't have. And together we're going to be good. Now, this is not some study group, and it's not an intervention group. We're going to have a lot of fun, eat a lot, have a lot of rowdiness, watch the game, cuss Mahomes. You know what I'm talking about. I mean, we're going to have fun, but we're going to make each other better. So I challenge the men listening to this: don't just be satisfied with light friendships. Drill down until you have a free fire zone with other men who are making each other better, and then lifetime relationships will grow from that.
Yeah. And for those who are listening, the resource I'll put a link in there is Building a Band of Brothers that Stephen wrote. And that's the playbook, and it's a small, like you envisioned, a smaller kind of a booklet type of a thing. I think it's sitting right over there on the windowsill. But that's your playbook, guys, for it. Now, Stephen, I want to talk about, you mentioned it in the Book of Manly Men. You've mentioned it a few times here on this discussion. You say rowdy. I love, because I think when some people hear that, they might think of one thing way over here, but I think you're talking about something that is allowing men to just be men. But I'd love to maybe hear more about, how do you unpack, what does rowdy look like? Because I think people might also hear guys trip, and they might think of going to Vegas and doing all sorts of these things, or spring break 2001 Panama City Beach. It's not any of that. But from your standpoint, how do you kind of define rowdy? What does rowdy look like with a band of brothers?
I think men need to keep their soul alive. They need to be breathless from exertion. They need to have adventure. They need to have excitement, a little bit of controlled danger. I don't mean hang by your thumbnails off a cliff. I just mean try something new, snorkel, scuba, whatever.
Yeah.
I've jumped out of airplanes. I scuba. I'm not jumping out of planes much these days just because I don't. It's not the kind of thing you walk down the street and do, and I'm a little busy. But I why is it that most guys can't throw a Coke can away without turning it into a Michael Jordan fade shot? Why is it that you put 2 guys in a break room with a piece of paper, they're going to fold that piece of paper into a triangle and turn that into the Super Bowl? Yep. Men need adventure. Men need to bark at the moon. Men need to pee at the sink. Men need to press against boundaries. And so I urge men, have physical goals. It can be as simple as push-ups by your bed. I'm going to break my record. I'm gonna lift more than I ever have. I'm gonna hold that position longer. I'm gonna hike. I'm gonna hike further. This year it's the 9,000 foot mountain. Next year it's the 12. Whatever. And by the way, every age has its own challenges, and I think this keeps your soul alive. I think this bonds you with other men. When was the last time you laughed till you almost cried? When was the last time you cried because you were moved? When was the last time that you hugged a man because he meant so much to you? When was the last time that you were excited to go out for an adventure? I think men need this stuff, and I've got some 99-year-old men who correspond with me because they listen to my podcast or read my books, and they're mall walkers, baby, 99 years old, and they are at the mall competing, talking smack with each other,
Yeah.
arguing about who most impressed Betty, the other woman at that age who's walking the mall. I mean,
Yeah.
these guys are alive. Everything's working. You follow what I mean?
Mhm.
And I love that. Why? Because they didn't just roll up in a corner and watch reruns of Gunsmoke.
Yeah.
So I think men need to keep that, and it changes at every age. I'm in my 60s. Everybody knows that. My age is on everywhere. It's on, Wiki and everything. No, I'm not hiding it. But I work out, and I'm flying down to Cabo to do some snorkeling here soon with some guys, and they challenge me, and if they see me adding a belt loop, it's like, man, we got to get you working out, and some of my guys are ex-NFL, so that's no joke, man. When they see I'm gaining weight, they're like, we're going to kill you.
Yeah.
So you got to have people who are pushing you that way. Now you're younger, and so that physical activity is a little easier. But you hit your 50s and your 60s, or you just curl up in front of a video game, and a bunch of Snickers at the age of 22 or whatever,
Yep.
you can just start dying on the inside. So it's a soul thing, it's a body thing, it's a mind thing. And given the mind-body connection that we know about now, we're just fools not to keep our bodies thoroughly active. And I do. And sometimes I look stupid. You know what I mean? I'm trying new stuff, and some guy got me involved in archery the other day. I almost put an arrow through my hand. I mean, that's just how life goes.
Yeah.
But at least I'm pressing the boundaries.
I like pressing the boundaries. I wrote down breathless from exertion. And at my age yet, Stephen, I'm still where I think, in my head, I think I'm in my 20s, but my body reminds me that I don't respond quite that way. But I still try to do those things. And I
Sure.
think that's just men being men. And I love your definition of that. Just to kind of round out the conversation and to be respectful and mindful of your time. So we're recording this here in Q1, and this will come out about a month later. But I'd love to know, what are you working on right now? What's coming up? What are you excited about? What can the listeners follow you and kind of start to see you working on, and things that you have that are coming up that you're really excited about?
I'm really excited about what we're doing through my organization called Great Man Global. We got a podcast, Great Man podcast. We got a website, which, it's not the main focus for me, greatman.tv. My website, stephenmansfield.tv. But my board and I are really taking off with new ways to impact men. And one thing that's really exciting is because we've gotten a little bit of a reputation for what we do with men, foreign governments are beginning to ask us to come in and do men's events in some of the high trafficking areas. For example, Romania, former Soviet republic, one of the big corridors for trafficking in the EU. So we had some relationship with the Romanian government. They've now said, would you come over here with your team, do men's events? We realize if we're going to stamp out trafficking, we're going to have a higher caliber of manhood, and communism denuded manhood in our part of the world. So I get to mix some of my, diplomat, statesman role with the work for men. We'll do some things in England this year. I believe we'll be in the Middle East if the bombs stop falling. And we will definitely be in Romania, and then of course all over the U.S. And I love that work. I'm real excited about that. So we keep on rocking, we keep on raising a little bit of money, and we keep on funding some of the really fine men speakers in our country to get it to go international, because we got a crisis in America, we got a crisis in the West, but there's a huge audience for our message around the world, and frankly, most of the American men's movement doesn't get overseas. So I'll talk to anybody who'll sit still long enough. I've talked to rooms full of Muslims holding guns. I've talked to I've talked to thousands and thousands of Asian young men in Asia, and we're just going to keep on pushing it. That's what lights my jets. I think we can turn I think we can reverse the downward spiral of manhood in our generation if we'll team together and pool our resources and be serious about it. And that's why I'm proud of you, Kyle, for what you're doing.
Well, thank you. I'm 100% behind that movement, the impact you're having. And just real quick for the listener, make sure that you go down all the things that Stephen just mentioned will be in the show notes. But just to affirm you here in closing, Stephen, you're someone who has been a mentor for me from afar, and I believe in what you're doing so much so that I view myself as someone who's following in your footsteps, trying to make an impact like you are. And so for someone to continue to push and continue to strive and make an impact, you're also impacting the people behind you, like myself, who are trying to do some of the similar things. And so I thank you for that. And maybe that's something you think of or don't think of often, but I just wanted to say thank you because that means a lot to me. And I enjoyed speaking with you today. Your sense of humor and your wisdom sprinkled in, I just really enjoy. So thank you for all the work that you're doing. And thank you again for your time today.
Buddy, you're very kind. And I'm just, again, proud of you. Let's keep on rocking, changing generations.
Thank you so much for listening. If you got any value out of today's episode, make sure to leave us a 5-star review on iTunes. If you're interested in joining us on a guys trip and being part of our community, check out all of our upcoming trips at guystrip.co. I'll see you on an adventure soon.